all politicians are liars and thieves. That's the show where we discuss recent headlines and sprinkle in some historical perspective to try to answer the question, how do we get out of this mess? Thinking that a politician is going to solve our problems. We are not right and we are not left. We are equal opportunity offenders and we will target both sides of the aisle. And rest assured, your favorite Congress critter will be in our crosshairs. On the show is Michael, and over there is
Joe.
And Joe, tonight I want to talk about money. And I want to dig into what is money and how is money made. And I'm going to let you kick it off with the simple question. What is money?
I want to defer to the expert on this one. I'm going to go with John Pierpont Morgan's testimony in front of Congress in 1912 that gold is money and all else is credit. So if you look at it as a commodity, as the way Mr. Morgan did, that's true. Gold has been money historically for just about as long back as there has been recorded history. Silver has been used in many cases throughout the years as a ratio of gold, pegged to gold at one ratio or another in different cultures, different civilizations throughout time, and everything else has been credit. What I teach my family is that money is a store of labor. The commodity angle is true, but I think of it more as an intangible object, and this is what defines its value through time, is that if I can do a thing today for a certain amount of money, when I'm old and unable to do it, will I still be able to pay somebody that same amount of money to do that labor for me? If the answer is yes, then I have honest money. And if the answer is no, then that money is not honest anymore. And every labor I exchange for money is a robbery.
And a robbery indeed has been going on for over 100 years. And on a previous show, we played a clip from Ron Paul where he said that we do not have honest money. And for those unfamiliar with Ron Paul, he was a huge proponent against getting rid of the Federal Reserve. And that's going to come up here in a few minutes. But when we look at money and what people think of money today, they think of dollar bills. And that is what we're calling the fiat money standard. And for those unaware, you probably think that we're on some kind of gold standard still. And if you did a man on the street interview, I'd be willing to bet that it's a very high percentage that people think that there's gold there in Fort Knox. I'm not saying there's not, but they probably think that our money is based upon gold. But in fact, it's based upon the sheer power of the United States federal government. And I wouldn't even call it money. I would call it a currency. And if you look at your $5 bill, it probably says Federal Reserve note right there on the top. And as does every other bill, ones, tens, etc. And when you look at Federal Reserve notes, Joe, I would also be willing to bet that most people have no idea how money is created. And I bet they would be appalled, or should be appalled anyway, to know that the Federal Reserve, I mean, the joke is they're not federal, nor do they have any reserves, because it's a private corporation. But going back to the fiat money, fiat currency piece of it, walking through how money is printed out of thin air, and the true effects on your life of that through inflation, where in fact the actual value is not your dollar bill, but it is the bonds that are issued by the U.S. government. So if we were to walk through how is a dollar created, so essentially what you have is the federal government through the Treasury issues some bonds, and then the bonds are sold out on the open market, and the equivalent, or close to the equivalent of actual dollars in currency, is distributed out and made available for use. And when you look at this system that was built by the government, that leads us to the Federal Reserve. And I know you have your thoughts on the Federal Reserve, and I have my thoughts, but I think it would be important because, again, we're looking at liars and thieves and politicians. on how was the Federal Reserve created, Joe? Why, when, and for what purpose?
Well, we're talking about an organization that was essentially made to enrich the already wealthy. The reasons given for the creation of the Federal Reserve was to smooth over the highs and lows in the credit cycle. So ever since there's been banking, and just to narrow that down, we don't have to talk about banking around the world, but within America, the original banks in America were chartered by states. These banks dealt not very differently from banks today with giving loans to individuals in some cases, to business interests, to organizations of people that wanted to achieve something that seemed to the lender to be a potentially profitable enterprise. Sometimes those enterprises were successful and the bank reaped rewards and the loans were closed out. Sometimes there was failure. And sometimes those failures were so big that you would lead to bank collapses. They would have taken so much of their depositors' money and given it out as loans that they couldn't possibly make it back up. So it's not simply a matter of you as a depositor putting your money into a bank. The bank only has as much money as the depositor puts in. The law allows them to magnify that amount and essentially create money out of thin air. It's called fractional reserve banking. So then, as now, when a company, an enterprise, an individual came into a bank and wanted to make a loan, most of that loan was new money, just dreamed into existence when the ink dried on the document. We've got this. If the bank made wise investments, if they made their loan to people who ultimately paid back the loan, nobody was any the wiser. Nobody was hurt. It was all good. But if enough of these loans were lent to failures, for want of a better term, then the bank would become insolvent. And in becoming insolvent, they would take all the money of their depositors with them into bankruptcy. That's no different today. The laws are the same today. The only thing that is different today is that we have what's called the Federal Deposit Insurance Commission, which ostensibly insures up to $250,000 of your deposits at your banks.
And that the FDIC piece is a corporation that is more than likely, I don't know the ins and outs of all this stuff. I'm not an attorney, but I would be willing to bet that they are lock in step with the Federal Reserve, again, which is a private corporation made up of large banks, like you said, too big to fail. We saw this in 07, 08, 09. All of them too big to fail. They let a couple go. They were just absorbed by J.P. Morgan and the other cousins of the J.P. Morgan banking empire. And the sneakiness of the Federal Reserve. This was in 1913. This was passed by Congress. Of all days, it was passed on the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, December 23rd. Who in the ever-loving, pickle-licking, December 23rd, you're going to pass the Federal Reserve Act and knowing that everybody is at their grandmother's house to eat cake and pudding and not paying attention to what you're doing. And leading up to that, there is a book out there that goes into fine detail on how these Congress critters conspired to get all this done. And the name of the book is A Creature from Jekyll Island. And Jekyll Island is somewhere on the East Coast. I don't remember now, but it's Georgia. There we go. Mm-hmm. And the author outlines with fine detail in the references and newspaper clippings of how these people, if I recall correctly, one guy built his own train tracks from one state to another to be able to transport in secrecy at night people from New York and the other northern states down to this Jekyll Island place where they can conspire to essentially put into effect a generational, I'm going to call it thievery, generational thievery. And most people don't know this. They just probably think there's always been a national bank. This was the fourth attempt at it. and this is the one that stuck around the longest. The previous 3, I think the first one lasted 20 years, and that was to pay off the debts from the Revolutionary War. And if there's historians out there listening, if you wanna make a comment on our X page and Twitter page at APALAT podcast, feel free to do so. And I think to recognize that this was the 4th, and knowing that it passed on December 23rd of all dates, I mean, they might as well just pass it on Christmas and called it a big F you to everyone. It just seems very shisty, and I believe that's the same year that the income tax was incorporated, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. That is the year that we passed that amendment, ostensibly to tax the rich, not everybody. Tell me how that works.
Right, it's if I remember right, it was on the top 1% of wealthy people in America, and then there's no such thing as a temporary government program, and here we are, over 100 years later, and, like, some people complain about a 25% tax on their stuff. Like, some people complain about a 50%, but the experts will tell you it's a graduated tax system. Nobody really pays that much money, but at the end of the day, it's just weird that in 1913, 2 of these things that have ostensibly it is waged war on what today you would call the middle class and lower class is still in effect and still going strong, by the way. And when you look at it, some people may wonder and ask themselves, well, Michael, when 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 they do when we have these ups and downs, like the crash of, I think we had a crash in 99 or something like that, dot-com bubble and '08, and when this alleged COVID thing came out, they flooded the market with lots of money. And they're gonna say, Michael, to be fair, I got $1,200 from the government. Joe, $1,200. And what do you think the corporations got out of this, Joe?
Well,
1,200 bucks?
they made a lot of money, a lot of money. I'm not going to name who, I'm not going to name what, but I did look to see who took some of that funding for small companies that seemed to be in jeopardy. My mother's employer, who handles pharmaceuticals, was never in danger of any sort of shutdown. They were essential throughout. They took, well, I forget what it was, $5 million or something. The owner took from the government. Not a clearer case of theft have I ever seen than that. But that's the way our system is set up, is to reward the people that play along with the system. But let me go back for a second. I want to finish the reserve or the creation of money thing, because this is important to bring us to where we are today. Banks back in history and banks today generate money almost out of thin air because of fractional reserve banking. So, for example, if you look at houses today, if you look at why houses, trying to go out today, if you want to go and buy a home today, if you look at just the cost of the house, not the interest rate on the mortgage, but simply the cost of the house, why it's so expensive, this is really functionally the result of inflation, and that inflation is the result of mass fractional reserve banking. When the bank signs the loan to a new buyer to buy a home, they have essentially willed that money into existence. It didn't exist before the day they closed on the contract to buy that house. That money didn't exist. But now it's out there, and it's not money, it's a debt. It's however many hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy the house. Historically, during the 19th century and most of the 20th century, there were limits to how much you had to have. Maybe if you had $1 in deposits, you could only create $10 in loans, say a 1 to 10 ratio. As of 2020, that rate dropped to 0. They did that in response to the pandemic, to the virus that shall not be named. They did that I guess essentially in order to protect our system. So to put this all together, banks forever have had this sort of ability to create money out of thin air. That's how banking crises in the past happened. That's how the Federal Reserve comes along because all these banks have failed regionally, sometimes nationally. These crises come up in banking, and it hurts people because there was no insurance. When you had your money in the bank and the bank went under, your money was gone. You were starting again as if you had never had a dime in your life. You started out new. In a nation without all the regulation that we have today, that wasn't so hard. Today, it's virtually impossible. So there have to be all these protective systems in place like the FDIC and whatnot. Well, after March of 2020, there's no bank in America that really has a limit on that. If they think they can make money, they can make the loan. Whether they've got the money to backstop it or not makes no never mind. What the Federal Reserve did was it took all the small, regional, and sometimes national banking crises of old and offered some sort of insurance against them. They said, we'll take care of this. We'll create a system whereby we backstop the banks. We become the lender of last resort so the bank never becomes insolvent. When they're in trouble, we'll lend to them under structured terms that require them to become responsible, with air quotes, and take care of their business. And after the Reserve Act was passed, early in 1921, we had a mini depression. It didn't last very long. It was very short. And it looked on the surface like maybe the Federal Reserve had things under control. And then comes the crash of 1929. Now, banking and the stock market are not the same thing. But moneyed interest had a lot of their money in that stock market. The people that were paying back loans, the people that were paying debts, the companies that were paying debts were heavily invested in that market that crashed in 1929. And in a situation like this where there's no backing for these loans, there's nothing underlying what the bank has given out. When a default happens, it begins, well, it can begin, not every time, but it can begin, and it did in this case, a downward spiral. So that by 1932, banking and equities and everything were in an awful mess. We've stuck with this system despite that, and despite the many socialist solutions of the 1930s to fix what was never a capitalist failure. We've kept this central bank in place, and we've come forward to the future. Whereas today, the Federal Reserve is essentially no more than a lender to government. That's what's going on today. That's why they have a multi-trillion-dollar balance sheet in debts. Their job today is not, as is reported, to manage inflation or to manage employment. Their job is to keep the U.S. federal government solvent. Their job is to fund inflation.
It's ironic that 16 years after the Federal Reserve was put into place, that should have been somewhat fresh in people's minds, and it's probably convenient to forget. And like prior to that, you had all these state-run, not state-run banks, but state chartered banks.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the Federal Reserve was come into place to prevent these state chartered banks and bank runs. And then lo and behold, in 1929, voila, it's the game, folks. It's the game, not the laws and systems you put into place to prevent it. It's the game. And they have built a higher threshold of entry into playing the game, and you're shut out of it. There are some state chartered banks, but you will not have access to the same benefits that are associated with the Federal Reserve banking system. It happened, and it's by design, folks. This is not some savior that is going to keep people from doing, I'm going to call them dumb things in the market, because somebody's going to win, and when they win, they're going to win big. And when you lose, you're going to lose big, unless you're just in for a little bit, and then you're just going to lose. But if you fast forward and you look at the amount of money that the federal government introduced, and when you look at the Fed fund rates and what Trump did to reduce that fractional reserve lending down to zero, that was not by mistake. This is intentional. This is I'm going to call it my conspiracy theory, is that Trump intended to drive this to zero, to drive up inflation. And when you look at the amount of money that was passed out that we touched on earlier, you may have gotten $1,200. I don't remember what the paychecks were that were handed out, but
That's what I got.
$1,200. Okay, that seems to ring a bell with what I think was handed out.
There was a lot going on back then.
But you got to think of every crisis. It's always like $1,200, and everybody cheers the 1,200. And the people at the top, there's a thing called a Cantillon effect, if I'm saying it correctly. And essentially, folks, what that means is that if you are the closest to that money spigot, you get the most bang for your buck. So you think about the inflation rates, the prices going up are a symptom of the money supply flowing in. And I had heard reports that Trump had effectively doubled the money supply or close to it within a very short period of time. And when you look at the price of real assets, the people that got that money first went out and bought the real assets. And you're probably sitting there head scratching thinking like, well, the prices of housing went up and real estate and used cars. These people aren't fools. They went out and somehow bought the real assets and priced you out. And like, I didn't get a 48% pay increase over a 5-year or a 3-year period. And the point here is that the inflation that you're complaining about was intentional. These are not accidents. They have thousands of people in these think tanks in DC that they know exactly, maybe not exactly, but on a principle level, they know if you pump in $5, $6, $15 trillion into the economy, it's going to go to large corporations first, and they get to use the money first. You get $1,200 and you're happy because now you can buy some hamburger at the store to feed your family, maybe a big screen TV.
Mm-hmm.
And it should infuriate everybody listening, knowing that these people have put a system into place. And again, this was the 4th attempt at not at a Federal Reserve, but at a national bank to supply the government with money. And that is the design of the system.
Mm-hmm.
You can't look at it in a rational manner and say, nah, this is all accidental. Like, none of it is accidental. It's doing as designed.
I've heard before, I think it's apropos to this place here. There has been, this just occurred to me. I want to say it this way. As we talk about things here in this podcast, we're gonna really point to the naked truth of things that everyone wants to believe that were just blatant lies. And in this case, we're all victims of trusting the skill of experts. This is maybe the biggest lie that came out of the progressive era of the late 19th century, is the idea that there were experts who could do things. If you could imagine in your mind what $1 trillion looks like, let alone $39 trillion, if you can imagine what $1 trillion looks like, imagine the kind of, if you were serious, if you owned the $1 trillion and you wanted that $1 trillion to be useful and productive, how many people would it take to account for this, to give you ledger entries for all the transactions that happened, to show you that the money was being spent wisely in the way that you directed it to be? Well, that'd be almost another $1 trillion just paying those people to do it. And that's the magic here. It's all a con. I've heard it said before that if you can sit down for a few hands at a poker table and you can't tell who the mark is, you're the mark. And that's us as the people here. You see these huge numbers that the government has created. They can only create these numbers because the Federal Reserve is, in essence, monetizing our debt. This is what central banks do any place where they are in a symbiotic relationship with government. This is what happened in Zimbabwe. This is what happened in Argentina. This is what happened in Weimar Germany. The Federal Reserve isn't there now to protect you, me, or anyone else. They're not there to guarantee an employment rate. They're not there to defend an inflation rate. They're there to ensure that the federal government can borrow as much as they need, as often as they need, at the lowest rates possible to continue that Cantillon effect.
And it's sad that this is all, I'm not going to say all, but I think I mentioned this in the last show that them, and those have nefarious reasons for waging wars, and one of those is that you virtually get an unlimited supply of money to go drop bombs, and when you look at the empire building, I think we said that it's on its last legs, I believe, and what you don't really capture. What you do is you take the ability to water down the dollar and you spread it out to other countries that you just went to. So now you got a little bit more leg to stand on to kick that road, or that can down the road, and knowing that you're coming to the end. And again, I don't claim to know what the end goal is, but it seems to me that, I mean, let's be real. We're never going to pay back $39 trillion. Never going to happen, Joe. It's just not going to happen.
No, and it was never meant to. This is simply an extraction. That's all this is. The people that have walked away, the people at the top of the Cantillon effect who have made the profit, they're going to walk away into the sunset and leave the rest of us to deal with the fallout.
And as you stated on the last show, when it does indeed end, it's going to be painful. It's going to be very painful. And if you're sitting there watching Fox News and you're watching Rand Paul talk about how he's going to implement a 6% whatever cutback on this thing so we can pay down to $39 trillion, I mean, you're a fool. It's just never going to happen. And like the number has always just gone up.
That's right.
It's never gone down. And you may point to plans where Clinton had a plan to get it down in 6 years to nothing and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? You know what pops up every few years? Joe, what pops up every few years? We find some guy somewhere that we say, you know what? We need to go bomb them.
That's right. That's right. And the people that need to go bomb him are always the people that we elect to solve our problems.
Right.
And that turns out to be the solution.
Right.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. I had a plan to get it done, but then we found this guy over there that he needed some bombing, so we need to borrow $17 trillion, and then there's as you said, shall not be named, since we're done bombing. Let's have this thing that shall not be named pop up so I can pump another, I don't know what the number, I've read numbers as high as $12 trillion into the economy to thwart the deadly virus. Joe, we're getting deep into the time here, and I want to close up the show. And if you're thinking that your politician has your best interest at heart, really need you to think about that. Think again, and look at what they do when they do it. As we pointed out, the Federal Reserve Act, December 23rd. Like, who does that? Who passes a bill on December 23rd?
The people that pass that kind of bill on that date are not the good guys. And the Federal Reserve is a serious problem. It's shrouded in a lot of secrecy. The average person really doesn't know, including me, doesn't know half of what the Federal Reserve does. But it's obviously a problem. And it's just one of many problems that we have here. For a very long time, deliberate efforts have been made by the economically gifted and by the political class to change our Constitution, to change our way of life, to change our laws, to take from us the freedom that our founders intended for us to pass on to our children and grandchildren into perpetuity. And we would like for you to come back here and listen to us, because we're going to demonstrate to you step by step a number of things that are not normally talked about, things you don't hear people talk about. But these are structural changes that have undermined the Constitution that was meant to protect your freedom and mine so that we could live the life we want to live. We're not here to tell you how to live or what to believe or how you should live your life. That's your choice. God gave you that right, and we endorse it. Listen to us, hear what we have to say, and judge for yourself.
And follow us on Twitter, formerly known as X, at APALAT podcast, or head on over to our website at apalat.com. All politicians are liars and thieves. Thanks for listening to the show.